Hello, everyone. Right, I hope this is working. Sorry, you might have seen me popping up randomly on Facebook because I was trying to sort out I couldn't get on last week and I had to do some kind of weird update on the group via Facebook. So sorry about that. So I'm hoping this is now working okay. I've got a few questions in, but one of them I thought was quite interesting. So I thought I'd do a bit of a deep dive on it. I'll read it out. So it's someone, it wasn't actually on the group, it was someone who messaged me privately and said they've got a friend who's been sober for over a year and has made a conscious decision to go back to drinking, but specifically only wine. He's interested in enology, and really interested in that aspect. So enology is what that means is that you're a prick. It means it's these people that are like wine connoisseurs, supposedly. He's been to at least one party where he had 3 glasses. People were watching out for him. He did mess up so people were watching out for him. So he just had 3 glasses. He said he did mess up his sleep. It was really bad. And then they say, I'm not really sure what my question is. I feel weird about it. I don't know how to be supportive. Worried it will end up like I've seen others when I've seen them go back to drinking, where they go the whole ham. It's been a few weeks and so far it looks okay. He's talking about organising a trip to France and he's talking about wanting to taste all this wine. I've said he needs to make whatever decision is best for him, and I'm here if he needed to talk about it, and I will be there for him. So I thought it was a good time to sort of do a bit of a deep dive on this, because obviously what we're talking about here is moderation. And it comes up time and time again in many, many different forms. And the reason I think it's worth talking about in some detail is because when you start drinking, it all seems to be fun and games and you can take it or leave it. And slowly and inexorably, it takes more and more of a hold on you. And eventually you start to realize there's a problem with it. But at that point, the usual course of events is not to quit, but to try and moderate. And that's usually what friends and colleagues and family encourage. They don't often say stop. They just say, you just need to try and drink a bit less or drink a bit more sensibly or only drink on this occasion. And, do you really have to go and get completely hammered? Why don't you just have one or two? And on the face of it, it kind of makes sense. So what people then often do is they spend sometimes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years or even decades trying and failing to moderate. Um, and it's almost like part of the quitting process. You have to get to grips with understanding that moderation doesn't work before you move on to quitting. So part of Alcohol Explained and Alcohol Explained 2 was trying to explain to people why moderation is so inherently difficult. So instead of wasting weeks, months, years and decades constantly trying something and wondering why you're constantly failing, it was to kind of to explain the mechanics behind it, and to explain why it is inherently difficult. So you can skip that phase. So you can start to realize you've got a problem and then move straight on to quitting without wasting loads and loads of time. So one of the main points here is the physiological effects of alcohol. And I've spoken, people who watch these lives regularly will be sick to the back teeth, but I don't think you can talk about it enough. Alcohol is a sedative, it's a depressant. When I use the term depressant, I'm talking about it in its chemical sense as something that decreases or inhibits nerve activity. Okay, but the human brain is not passive, it's reactive. So when you take something like alcohol, it reacts to it. And it reacts in lots of different ways. It releases lots of drugs, chemicals, and hormones. It becomes slightly hyperactive in other ways, slightly more sensitive. But what it amounts to is the brain becomes hypersensitive to work under the sedating effects of the alcohol. Now, the more you drink, the better your brain becomes at countering the effects of the alcohol, the more it's able to become hypersensitive. And the knock-on effect of that is you can drink more and more, and that's what tolerance is. It's your brain learning to become more and more hypersensitive so it can work under the sedating effects of the alcohol. People who are very heavy drinkers quite often get through 2 or 3 bottles of spirits a day. I mean, forget everything about genetics. If you took a human being who'd never drunk alcohol before and gave them 3 bottles of spirits, I mean, firstly, they'd vomit it all up anyway, but if you could somehow keep it inside them so it went into their drug stream, they'd be dead. Okay, so over the years, your brain becomes better at countering the sedating effects of the alcohol. Now, that's a good thing in many ways, because it's your body adapting to being constantly poisoned so that you can survive it. The problem is, of course, when the alcohol wears off, because when the sedating effects of the alcohol wears off, there's a period where your brain is still hypersensitive before it then goes back to normal. And that hypersensitivity in small doses just causes minor anxiety. But that anxiety grows. The more you drink, the worse the imbalances and the worse the anxiety. And it becomes worse and worse and worse, and it turns from anxiety into full-blown depression, and thereon into the shakes and the hallucinations that you think of as, you know, DTs or chronic alcoholics when they go through withdrawal and they're shaking, all the rest of it. It's just your brain being set to work while under the effects of loads of alcohol, and the alcohol's worn off, it's not there anymore. This is what I call alcohol withdrawal. And a lot of people struggle with this concept, but the fact of the matter is, anyone who has ever drunk an alcoholic drink has had alcohol withdrawal. Now, if you've never tried alcohol before in your life and you have your first alcoholic drink, the brain isn't very good at countering it because it's never come across it before. So the results of that are twofold. Firstly, you get drunk very easily. And secondly, the withdrawal is very minor because your brain can only do so much. It's not used to it. So although people who have never drunk before do get alcohol withdrawal, it's really, really minor, and it's almost imperceptible. You wouldn't even notice it. It's when you start to drink at heavier and heavier levels that it becomes more and more noticeable. So if we think of alcohol addiction, clearly withdrawal alone doesn't make an addiction. Where addiction comes in is when your brain starts to desire another dose of the drug to relieve the after effect, the withdrawal that the previous dose has left. So if you think your brain is normal, you take alcohol, which is a sedative, so your brain becomes hypersensitive to work under the sedating effects of the alcohol wears off, and your brain is then left hypersensitive, and it manifests itself into feeling anxious and out of sorts and not really being able to cope with problems and being easily overwhelmed by things. Now, the quickest way to remedy that chemical imbalance is actually to take another drink, because in sedating, in taking more of that sedative, you're going back to where your brain is a bit more chemically balanced. We call it homeostasis. It's a chemical balance. Now, the chemical imbalance comes in because your brain's hypersensitive. So if you take more of alcohol, you take more of a sedative, you're countering that hypersensitivity and getting back to normal. Okay, so as we drink over the years, what you eventually learn is, sometimes consciously, but usually subconsciously, when the alcohol starts to wear off, you get an unpleasant feeling, and that causes the desire for the next alcoholic drink. Because when you take that alcoholic drink, you're relieving the withdrawal. Now, this is what people who say, I don't have an off switch, that's all it is. All they mean is that they have learned on a subconscious level that when one drink wears off, it leaves an unpleasant feeling that needs the next drink to relieve it. Okay. In other words, every drink you take causes the desire for the next one. And that's where your off switch disappears, because as soon as one drink wears off, you want another. Okay, that takes time to learn, because mostly with alcohol, we might drink in the evening. So you might have 1 or 2 or 3 drinks in the evening when you first start drinking, and then you go to sleep. So you sleep through most of the withdrawal, and it might be sort of there the next day, but for most of the next day, you're not going to take a drink anyway. It actually takes a long time for you to get to the position where an alcoholic drink has worn off, and then you have another one, and then you start to learn, and that's where you get into that period of addiction. Now, the problem is this is learned behavior, okay, and it can't be unlearned. So once you learn that there's an unpleasant feeling when an alcoholic drink wears off and you need another alcoholic drink to get rid of it, that's it for life, because every time an alcoholic drink wears off, you will want another one. So it doesn't matter whether you stop drinking for a week, 6 months, a year, 10 years, or 50 years. Okay, you will never forget. If you took another drink, if you were dry for 50 years and you had another drink, it will wear off, leaving an unpleasant feeling, and it will need another drink to relieve that feeling. So when you get to that stage, moderation is inherently possible. Think of something that everyone knows is addictive, like cigarette smoking or, I don't know, methamphetamines or cocaine or something. Nobody gets addicted from one dose. It takes time. Every drug has a learning period before the person who's taking the drug starts to learn on a subconscious level that when that drug wears off, they need another dose to get back to feeling normal. Okay. With some drugs, it's much quicker than others, but when it's there, it can never be unlearned. So every drug has a take it or leave it stage. Alcohol has a very, very long one, but it's still there. And when you get through it, you can never go back to it. It's a once only phase. You can never go back to it, whether you stop this drug for 10 years, 50 years, like I said, whatever it is, when you start again, you go right back to square one. So that's one of the problems why trying to moderate is inherently difficult, because when you get to the stage of one drink wearing off causing the next one, you can never get back from that. Now, that's difficult enough as it is. But the other point here is cravings. So let's talk again about cravings. Cravings are a conscious thought process whereby you're essentially fantasizing about having something. Now, obviously, I'm talking about cravings for alcohol here. So when you're craving, what you're actually doing is sitting there telling yourself a lie, which is that an alcoholic drink will be really wonderful and solve all your problems. And you sit there fantasizing about it. But it's the same process for anything, whether you're craving food like chocolate or cake or something. All you're really doing is sat there thinking about how great it will be to have it. And while you're doing that, you're not concentrating on anything else. So let's say you're out with friends, or you're supposed to be sat down relaxing for the evening in front of the TV. You're not enjoying their company. You're not sat relaxing watching TV because you've got this horrible little internal tantrum going on about, I want this and it would be so lovely to have it. Okay. So often when you have a craving, what's the pleasure in relieving the craving is just to end that unpleasant internal dialogue. The actual thing itself becomes almost like a placebo, because let's take sitting in front of the TV. You're supposed to be sat there relaxing, enjoying yourself. You're not, because you've got this unpleasant internal dialogue going on. And the quickest way to end that internal dialogue is to just have the damn thing that you're craving in the first place, just so that you can get on with what you're doing, which is watching the TV. So you have the drink or the cake or whatever. Now you've got that unpleasant internal tantrum dealt with. You can get on with what you were doing in the first place, which is relaxing and watching TV. And that's why we can often get into this thing of, yeah, but I can't, I need alcohol to relax. We don't need alcohol to relax. You relax naturally. Alcohol's taken away your ability to relax. And then you need it then to get that ability to relax back, which is a very different thing from it actually relaxing you. So that's the other thing. Now, one of the big things, and Dawn always says this, take alcohol off the menu. Now, there's a very good reason why you do this, because part of craving, firstly, it's fantasizing, but you can really refine the torture by almost dangling the thing in front of you. So if you start to think, you know what, I could just have one tonight, you're really refining the torture. It's unpleasant enough to sit there thinking, for example, I would really like a drink. It would make me really happy. You're not going to be watching TV, enjoying it, or enjoying the company you're with or anything, because you're going on this internal dialogue. But if you want to ramp it up a level and make it even more unpleasant, you kind of almost taste it. You start to think of the possibility. You start thinking, I could just have one. Who cares? I've had a hard week. I deserve blah, blah, blah. You go through all these arguments. But what you're really doing is refining the torture. Think about if you're dieting and you really crave, I don't know, a pizza or a burger or a chocolate bar or something. Thinking about it would be unpleasant enough, but having it sat in front of you and raising up to your face so you can actually smell it and almost feel your teeth sinking into it is going to really refine the torture. Okay, so this is something else we need to bear in mind. If you take alcohol off the menu, you don't have it. Okay, and this is where I am. This is why people say, when do I get to the stage of not thinking about alcohol? It's not about not thinking about alcohol. It's what you're thinking about it. I think about alcohol probably 80% of my waking hours. But what I never do is waste time debating on whether or not I should have a drink, because I don't drink. Okay, if I have an argument with my wife, if I have a hard day at work, if I have, I don't know, anything, I don't drink. I go on holiday, I don't drink. I have Christmas, I don't drink. It's Friday night, I don't drink. I never have to think about it because I don't drink. Okay, so actually the certainty can hugely lessen cravings, because if you're not going to do it, you're much less likely to waste time fantasizing about it, and you're definitely not going to start torturing yourself with the possibility of having one because you do not do it. This is another problem with moderating. If you've quit and you don't smoke, like for me, it's Friday night, I don't smoke, and tomorrow it will be Saturday night and I won't drink. I don't drink. It's Friday night, I'm not going to drink. It'll be Saturday night tomorrow, I'm not going to drink. Hopefully in a few months' time, we'll be going on holiday and I won't be drinking. Fast forward 8 months, whatever it is, it'll be Christmas and I won't be drinking. I just do not do it. But if you start thinking to yourself, you know what, I will just have one or two, you turn that whole thing on its head, because instead of it's Friday night, I don't drink, I'm going to watch telly, I'm going to read a book, I'm going to do whatever, it will suddenly be, ooh, can I have a drink? Can I have a drink? Can I have a drink? No, yes. So suddenly you're no longer free of alcohol in that you just don't do it and that's fine. Suddenly it's there as a possibility, and it's there as a possibility all the time. So that's the problem with it as well. See, how it works out is, with moderation, people will work at it to make it work. Okay. The reason we find it hard to stop drinking is because we want to do it. Okay. Yes, it causes us hangovers and it makes us tired and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, we desperately want to keep doing it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a problem. Okay. For a lot of people, it's that desire that causes them to want to make moderation work. Because if you've got a problem with alcohol and you're attempting to moderate, for a lot of people, that's their last chance saloon. So this chap here, he stopped for a year. He's obviously not happy being stopped. He wants to drink again. If he drinks again and gets hammered all the time, he's going to have to stop again. Okay, so he's going to move heaven and earth to try and make that work. And this is another of the dynamics I think we need to bear in mind with it. It's a lose-lose situation, because I've talked about the craving and I've talked about the physiological side of it, which makes it inherently difficult to moderate. Now, what normally happens is when people try and moderate is they come a cropper and they end up getting absolutely hammered. And they might get hammered once and then moderate successfully again and then get hammered again. And slowly it just gets worse and worse. And that's to do with the physiological side of it. And of course, the constant craving when you allow the possibility of a drink back into your life. But the problem with it is it's lose-lose, because let's just think about this. Okay, we've discussed, 70% likelihood he's going to end up drinking far too much and be right back where he was in the first place and need to quit all over again. But let's just think about what happens if he does succeed. Okay, when he has a drink, it will wear off, causing the desire for the next one. Okay, the only way then to not have that next one is to just sit there desperately wanting it and not having it. That is inherently difficult. A lot of people will manage it through desperation, as I said, because they want it to work, because if it doesn't work, then they have to quit for good and they desperately want to keep drinking. So the reality is, even if he does manage it, even long term, it won't be what he's thinking it is, because what he's thinking is, it will be like when I started, where I could drink or not drink and I was fine. So I'd go out with my friends, I've had a few drinks, I'd go home, I'd sleep it off, and I'd get up the next day and just crack on. Okay, that won't happen, because the next day that imbalance will be there and your brain will interpret that imbalance as, I want to drink. And because alcohol is now back on the menu, he'll then be constantly debating, can I have one? It's too early now, but can I go out tonight and then I can allow myself? And that's it. The obsession with alcohol in moderating is as strong as if you're just drinking all the time. It's not the perfection you think it is. Moderation, when you've started drinking at a certain level, is never what you think it is, because it's never, oh, I just have one or two and then I just forgot about having another one and I just didn't want it. That is not possible. The only way you can maintain moderation is to be constantly fighting the desire to have a drink. The other thing to bear in mind is, people do post, they will tell you they're moderating and it's working. They're desperate for it to work. okay, because they want to keep drinking. They can't bear the thought of giving it up. So they're moderating, and it has to work for them. Otherwise, they've got to give up. So they tell themselves that it's working, and they tell you it's working, and they believe it. And for some of it, for some of them, it may be, but usually only short term. And even if it is working, it's not the perfect situation that they think it is anyway. Also, what I would say is this applies just as much to so-called normal drinkers. Okay, we have this view of normal drinkers that they can just genuinely take it or leave it. But think about it. How many people do you actually know that if they were out drinking and they were halfway through the evening and the alcohol just suddenly disappeared, there was none left, the pub ran dry, or they were at a party and all the alcohol ran out and there was none left? How many of them do you honestly think would just be fine with that, not have a problem with it at all, and just carry on the evening as if nothing had happened? Very, very few of them. The only people that are in that situation are the people that don't really like it in the first place. They're the people right back at the start of the process who've only ever had one or two and just not learnt to have more when they start drinking. So even these so-called normal drinkers are in the same boat. So don't start thinking this is only for people who have a problem with alcohol. This is for even those so-called normal drinkers. People who sit there and tell you that they can, because I've had this so many times, people say, "Oh, yeah, no, I'm fine with it because I just have one or two and it's fine." Alan Carr said this 40 odd years ago. If someone feels the need to tell you that they can take something or leave it, it means they can't take it or leave it, because it would be such a ridiculous thing to say. And I forget what example he gave, but imagine if you just said, "Yeah, we had hot dogs for dinner," and someone said, "Oh yeah, I like hot dogs, but I can go for months without a hot dog. I just have one or two and then I just stop. It's really not a problem for me." You'd be thinking, what on earth are you talking about? When people feel the need to tell you that they can take or leave something, it means they can't. The other issue on this, and I'm going on about it, but I think it's worth probably dragging the whole thing out and going through it. It's a catch-22 situation, moderation. Okay. The only way to be free of alcohol is to see it for the disgusting muck that it actually is. Okay. It's a carcinogenic chemical that leaves you feeling slightly dull before leaving you feeling then really anxious. It ruins your sleep. It messes with your emotions. There's nothing pleasant about it. Okay, so being free is seeing it for what it is and not wanting it anymore. Okay, that is the only way you can have complete control over alcohol. Okay, things have control over you because you desire them, and the more you desire something, the more control it has over you. The only way to stop something having any control over you is to not want it anymore. Okay, so to be completely and utterly free of alcohol, you need to not want it anymore. Okay, so theoretically, you could moderate if you had no desire to, to drink. But if you have no desire to drink, why on earth would you moderate? So for me, I have zero desire to drink, which means I don't want to moderate. I have as little interest in having one or two as I have in going back to where I was 6 or 7 years ago when I was drinking ridiculous amounts of alcohol all the time. I just have no interest in it. So when somebody wants to moderate, it means they want alcohol. They still desire it, which means a few things. Firstly, they've still got a problem with it. But more importantly, they're not seeing it for what it is. Because this is the other thing that irritates me with moderation. And when people say, "I've got the problem, everyone else is okay," what you're actually saying is, it's a pleasant thing to do, because why would you want to do something unpleasant? You wouldn't want to, I don't know, smash your hand with a hammer a few times a day, would you? You only want to do something that's pleasant. So if you want to moderate, it means you've misunderstood something about alcohol anyway. So all of that, I hope, kind of goes to explain the problem. I think here it is an unpleasant one. I mean, the actual question is, what can you do about it? So having given this massive explanation, I kind of fall down a bit at the most important part, which is what you can do about it. The answer, I'm afraid, is probably not an awful lot. People have to make their own decisions. And I think the problem is, although he will no doubt sort of say, I've thought this through really carefully, what it really comes down to is what we all do before we manage to see the light and quit properly, which is, I desperately want to keep doing this. How can I rationalize it? And to go through all these different ways and think it through. It may work for him because he may be so desperate to not quit that he will make it work, but it's not going to be a happy existence, because it will be, as I say, it will be just constantly obsessing about alcohol and constantly fighting it. What will not probably happen, and what happens to the vast majority of people at some point or another, is it will just all go to pieces again. And at that point, I suppose all you can do is offer information. The books are certainly there, and this information is there. I give it to people in the hopes that they will cut out those months, years, and decades of going through this process, because it is horrible. The moderation, in my mind, in many ways, is the worst of all worlds, because when you're drinking loads, I mean, it is grim and it is horrible, but at least you get to drink as much as you want a few times a week. Whereas when you're moderating, you get the worst of all worlds. You're not free, you're ruining your sleep, you've got all that anxiety from the alcohol, and you never, ever get to do what you desperately want to do in the first place, which is to drink as much as you want. So in many ways, it's the most heartbreaking. Of course, it's worse as well, because people are constantly getting hammered for those exact reasons, because when you start taking it, it's almost impossible to stop. So they're constantly waking up thinking, oh my God, I've done it again. I only wanted to have 2 or 3 and I've ended up getting absolutely hammered. And then they start thinking there's something wrong with them. There isn't. You're just taking an addictive drug. It's the same as if you kept picking up cigarettes and smoking them. You'd be constantly smoking more cigarettes than you wanted to. So I hope that's kind of useful. I thought it was useful just going through moderation again, and talking about it. I'll move on to the rest of the questions now. Fading effect bias, strategies for managing this would be great. I listened to a live. Oh yeah, so someone asked, strategies for managing this would be great, and someone put in. I listened to live about this subject yesterday. I think it was July 2020. If you look back, he covers it fully. I mean, I do tend to cover the same stuff over and over again, and the point of the lives isn't necessarily just to cover a topic and it's done. I do talk about the same things over and over again, and I think if it's helpful, then ask for it. So when I do the Thursday post, you may know all there is to know about cravings, but you might just want to hear it again. So do put it in. I don't mind going over the same stuff over and over again. I think it's useful to keep talking about it, to be honest. So fading effect bias, of course, is whereby, and again, this feeds very much into moderation. Humans have an innate tendency to look back on past events much more positively than they were when they actually happened. Okay, it's a universal human trait. So it's not just people in the West who do it, or people in the Middle East or whatever. It's universal. So everyone the world over has this tendency to look back and see things, remember them much more positively than they actually were. No one really knows why we have that. I think the prevailing theory is that it just helps humans maintain a positive outlook on life. But the fact of the matter is, I think it's generally a useful thing. But when it comes to addiction, of course, it works against us, because when you're drinking, you're tired, you're anxious, you're lethargic, you've got no energy. It is not pleasant. Even when you're sat there actually drinking the muck, it's not particularly nice. You're still like half comatose and exhausted, and it's just not pleasant. So then you quit, but then you forget all the reality of just, dragging yourself through the day exhausted, lying awake at 4 a.m, or even sat there half comatose in front of the telly, just semi-dead, frankly, from alcohol. And you just start to think of how wonderful it was and all these fun times you had with alcohol, which are it's fantasy, it's not real. And you may have had 1 or 2 situations like that, but it's certainly not typical of the 99% of your drinking experience. But these are the things we focus in on. So actually over time, and this goes back to this chap who's, started drinking again, only wine and moderately. What happens over time is you start to look back on your drinking much more positively. So this is why a lot of the time, yes, it's difficult to get into the sort of the groove of sobriety, to get those first few days and weeks under your belt, so you sort of settle into a rhythm. But for other reasons, the longer you go without drinking, sometimes the harder it is to stay sober, because you start to forget the reality. and you start to think more and more about the this ridiculous fantasy of what it was like, but of course it wasn't really like that. And this is one of, I think, one of the most heartbreaking things about addiction generally, is the addict is never happy, because when they're taking their drug, they are miserable because it isn't a pleasant one. So if we look at alcohol specifically, like I say, you're anxious, you'll never sleep, you go to bed absolutely exhausted, and you still wake up at 4 a.m. unable to sleep. And that's because of that chemical imbalance. That anxiety that kicks in 5 hours after your last drink is like drinking a massive jug of very strong coffee, having a massive caffeine overdose. You can't sleep, you're anxious, your mind's all over the place. So you're anxious, your heart rate goes up, alcohol increases your heart rate massively, and knock-on effect from that. When your heart rate goes off, your body tells you it's tired and it wants you to sit down and rest. So when you're drinking, you've never got any energy, apart from the lack of sleep. The heart rate kicks in on that as well. It's a really unpleasant existence. But over time you start to look, so it's unpleasant. So what do? You do the obvious thing and you quit, and you may quit easily, or it may take you months or years or whatever. So you quit. But then over time, you forget the reality. So you're miserable when you're in the throes of addiction. But then when you stop, you forget all the reality of it, and you start fantasizing about how wonderful it was. So you become sober, but you don't really enjoy it anyway, because you think about how wonderful it was to sit out on the balcony on holiday, or whatever ridiculous fantasy you've got about it, and how you had that drink and all your cares just faded away, as if they ever did. So you go back to drinking again. And then, of course, when you go back to drinking, you don't go back to the fantasy, you go back to the reality. So quite often with addiction, people, it's like a pendulum. They're just swinging backwards and forwards between sobriety and drinking, because they're not happy at one or the other. But there is a simple solution, and that's just to remember the reality. Fading affect bias, it just warps your view, but it can't stop the reality. So just keep sticking with the reality of it. It becomes habit in the end. I found it useful the thing I hated most about drinking was being so tired all day long and just longing to go to bed, and finally collapsing in bed. And then no matter how tired I was, 4 o'clock in the morning, wide awake again because of the effects of the alcohol. And then to lie there knowing you're exhausted and this is your chance to sleep, but you can't do it. And then you've got a whole other day to go through on top of it. And that was what I hated most. And that's, in a way, I think I just clung on to that thought. And every time I see an alcoholic drink, that's what I see. I don't see all this nonsense that people build up around it. I just see that one reality. But you can pick any reality you want of it. But just fading effect bias, I think I say in the book, it's like looking for a magnifying glass at an ant. If you get an ant and look through a magnifying glass at it, you don't jump out of your skin because you've suddenly seen a giant ant. You know that the magnifying glass is causing a warping effect to make that ant look bigger. So when you start thinking, you know what, I used to really enjoy drinking, it was really good fun, just see it for what it is. It's nonsense, and just stick with the reality. Getting past the first few hurdles of cravings when having little confidence in myself to be able to stop drinking, despite knowing the awfulness of what alcohol does. Self-sabotage advice would be greatly received. Thank you. P.S. I've stopped for 2 to 3 weeks several times and felt the physical benefits, but then relapsed, psychological, emotional triggers, hence the lack of confidence. Now struggling to get past day one as a result. So I've talked about cravings anyway. They are fantasizing about it. So relapsed. So I think it almost sounds like you're destroying your own confidence just with the knowledge that you've fallen down once. What I would say is self-sabotage is kind of one of these terms that people bandy around, but self-sabotage is just kind of, it's just, of course you're sabotaging yourself because you want to keep drinking. It's kind of a bit of a nonsense term, really. What I would say, you mentioned psychological and emotional triggers. Okay, this is a very important one, because part of quitting drinking, because alcohol is a sedative, we tend to use it as a coping mechanism because it anesthetizes. So if you're upset or angry, or you've had a bad day at work and you're stressed, our natural reaction is to then reach for an alcoholic drink. Same with psychological and emotional triggers. feel an emotion you don't want, you naturally reach for something to anesthetize it. So what often happens is we quit drinking, but we don't really replace what you need to appreciate is that everyone needs a coping mechanism when things get bad. Now, if you're removing alcohol from the equation, you need a new coping mechanism. So this is one of the reasons why people quit drinking and then end up smoking more, or drinking loads of caffeine, or then just stuffing their face with sugar or crisps or whatever it is, like emotional eating, because they've removed their coping mechanism and they just kind of flounder around till they find another coping mechanism, and they're very used to consuming something to change how they feel, so they just replace the alcohol with cigarettes or coffee, or sweets or chocolate or refined sugar or whatever it is. So you do, to a degree, need to start thinking about just a different lifestyle generally, and you need to anticipate these psychological emotional triggers, and think about what you'll do when you get them. There's no point just saying, right, I'll quit drinking, and then, so say arguments with your spouse always trigger you to drink alcohol, which they do for most people. When you quit drinking, you're still going to argue with your spouse, maybe a bit less, but you're still going to argue with them. And you need to plan ahead. You need to think, right, what will I do when they're being intensely unpleasant and irritating? Because I can't now march out of the house and go and buy a 4-pack of Special Brew and sit in the park and drink it. So what am I going to do? Am I going to go for a run? Am I going to just sit and read a book? Am I going to just lose myself in a TV show? What is it I'm going to do? And you need to plan for these and get them in place. But you also need to bear in mind, so alcohol anesthetizes the trigger, the receptors in your brain that regulate emotion. Okay, so when you're drinking, your brain becomes less and less capable of regulating emotion. So any emotion you feel when you're drinking tends to run unchecked. So actually drinking to anesthetize or to deal with emotion is actually the worst, or one of the most ridiculous things you can do, because the first drink will take the edge off it slightly. But as that drink wears off and you take another one and another one and another one, which you need to do when you start, as I've dealt with already, because of the psychological effects, the physiological effects of it, as that increasingly intoxicates and negates your ability to regulate emotion, that emotion that triggered your drinking session in the first place tends to run more and more unchecked. So it becomes worse and worse. And that's another reason why I hate this phrase, alcohol is borrowing happiness from tomorrow, because it isn't. You're not happy when you're drinking anyway. The most you can say is the first few drinks slightly numb whatever unpleasant feeling you're feeling. But after that, things tend to get increasingly worse. I mean, just think of this anomaly. We all know that, the stereotypical drunk is, crying into their glass at the end of the evening, or, when you go out on Christmas drinks, people who aren't used to drinking start getting teary and retrospective and start messing, that thing of calling exes at 4 a.m. because you suddenly really miss them and feel really emotional about it. And of course, all the violence associated with drinking as well. So it causes that weird anomaly where we all naturally reach for a drink when we feel emotionally upset. But actually, after a handful of drinks, those emotions tend to be running completely unchecked anyway. So start to recognize that alcohol will be making it hugely worse, even during the drinking session. And then, of course, when you wake up the next day after an absolutely abysmal night's sleep, and you have the withdrawal, which magnifies any problem, it just looks absolutely worse. So I take a two-pronged approach here. Start to realize how alcohol is not helping any psychological or emotional trigger at all. It's making it 10 times worse, even while you're drinking, and get a plan into place of how you'll deal with things without alcohol. Someone's put confusion and fear in early stage sobriety and how to deal with low mood and raw, previously numbed negative emotional states, strategies for dealing effectively with these without resorting to alcohol. If you're talking about early stage sobriety, as in the first few days, 90% of that low mood and raw feeling is actually just alcohol withdrawal. Because for the first 2 or 3 days, that unbalance, that chemical imbalance is there, and you're overly sensitive, overly sensitized. So whatever it is that is that raw, really unpleasant feeling, well, it's probably not that bad anyway, because I'll give it a few days when your brain settles down and you get a bit more sleep. it's only going to look brighter. I'm not saying the problem will go away, but your interpretation of it will change hugely. It will stop looking like a mountain, and it might not go back to a molehill, but it certainly won't look like such a big mountain. So if you can deal with it in the first few days of sobriety, it's only going to get better. So I hope, numbed emotional states, strategies for dealing. So that's the thing I would say with that. Also, a lot of people say this. It's like, oh, I can't deal with this aspect of my life without alcohol. And then you say to them, what do you drink every waking hour of your day? And most of the time, the answer is no, I drink in the evening. It's like, well, hang on, this problem that you say you have to drink to live with, you're waking up at 6, 7, 8 in the morning, and you're going 4, 5, 10 hours without a drink. So you're dealing with that problem all day. You're only anesthetizing it for like 3 or 4 hours in the evening anyway. And not only that, if you're drinking every day, like I say, the alcohol withdrawal makes every problem look at least twice as bad. You're less mentally resilient. You're less able to deal with it. It looks twice as bad. So if you've got this problem and you're saying, I have to drink to deal with it, well, no, you don't at all, because you're probably spending the majority of your time not only dealing with it sober, but it's looking twice as bad as it actually was to begin with. Particularly because you say in early stage sobriety, give it a month, because I guarantee whatever it is you think is so awful, give it a month. It might still be there and it might be awful, but it will not be as awful, and you'll be much better. This is what I always say to people. If you can deal with something drinking, you sure as hell can deal with it sober, because you're much better mental state to deal with it. This is going to sound like a silly question and strange, but tomorrow is day 13 for me. And for the past 12 days, my feet have been absolutely freezing cold. Have you heard this before, or is it just me? So specifically feet, and not any other part of you, I don't know, I've not heard of before. But funnily enough, I think if I had to say the one benefit of drinking, it is that you tend to be warmer, because alcohol does a few things. Firstly, as an energy source, your body cannot store it as fat. Okay, don't get me wrong, there's a load of other refined sugars in it which it can and will store as fat, particularly all the extra food you eat when you're drinking. But the actual alcohol content on its own, it's an energy source that your body can't store. So what does it do with it? Well, it turns it into heat. That's why we tend to get hot when we're drinking, and why, the typical drinker has a red nose, because what that is, it's the blood, it's the veins going closer to the surface of the skin to try and lose the heat. And of course, when that happens all the time, they start to burst and all the rest of it. So you have that like massive red bulbous nose from people who are drinking very heavily. Also, it's an appetite stimulant. It makes you want to eat more, which may sound counterintuitive, bearing in mind alcohol is a sedative. But actually, when you start to understand our digestive system a bit more, it makes sense. When you eat something, that food has to be pushed through something like 20 foot of digestive tract, or 14 foot, I forget what it is, but it's pushed through by muscles. These muscles squeeze the food through every inch of that. It takes a huge amount of energy. That's why we tend to feel tired when we've eaten a massive meal. So what happens is your body tries to make you eat when you're resting, okay, which is why stimulants like speed and caffeine tend to remove our appetite, because that's when we start to get a bit more stimulated. It's like the fight or flight thing, so your appetite disappears. But when you sit down to rest and start to relax, that's when your body thinks, oh, they've got some downtime now, I can concentrate on digestion, so let's eat. So alcohol, being a sedative, actually makes you want to eat more. And of course, if you're eating too much all the time, which is what alcohol makes you do, you've got excess calories. And again, your body's turning it into heat. And of course, when you're drinking, you're taking on loads of excess calories anyway, so you tend to be fat. So drinkers, on the whole, tend to be overweight, which again keeps you warm. So that is one of the things with alcohol. If I had to pick a single benefit, when I was drinking, I was hot all the time. And now I tend not to be. Obviously, it's not worth remotely all the downside, and you just put on an extra jumper or pair of socks. But it's just, I think, an interesting little aside there. I'm interested to know if there are groups of people who have been sober longer, 9 months and longer. Sometimes I find that I'm drunk now or big hangover today conversations difficult, but still need the camaraderie of being alcohol free. There's got to be a ton of us by now. I've been asked this before, and even to put in like a sort of a separate alcohol explain group for people who, in fact, there's another question here, so they'll sort of be mixed up together. The reason I haven't done it is twofold. I think it's reciprocal. So I think it's hugely beneficial if people are posting to say, I'm drunk or I'm day one or whatever. If people jump in and say, you will get there, try this, try that, because these people are long-term sober. So I think it works that way, but I also think it works the other way. I think I kind of take your point, but don't forget about fading effect bias. People saying I'm drunk now and I'm miserable, and you see it all the time. People threatening suicide because they're drinking, and again, it feeds into the lie. It exposes the lie that alcohol is borrowing happiness from tomorrow. It isn't. Okay, people are as miserable as sin when they're drinking. It's a disgusting thing to do. It's just ridiculous. So I think it helps both types of people. And what I don't really want to do is to have a separate group where the pillars of sobriety go into it and kind of leave the other group to sort of drift a bit. I think that would be a shame. I mean, I will do it if there's enough interest, but I would rather not. I would rather do that than lose people, to be honest. But I think it's nicer if we can try and keep it all together. If there's enough interest, I mean, people message me and there's enough interest, and certainly I will do, though. I'm 6 months alcohol free today and no longer suffer from anxiety. I never realized the link between alcohol and anxiety. There seems to be an epidemic in our society with anxiety. I would like your views on whether this could even be tested, i.e. anxiety levels of drinkers versus non-drinkers. My hypothesis is there will be a big difference. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So when alcohol wears off, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Alcohol is a sedative, and when it wears off, it leaves a corresponding feeling of anxiety. The other problem, of course, is with sleep, in that so a lot of people think that sleep is just about going unconscious for a few hours. It's not. To sleep properly and to wake up feeling refreshed, you have to go through certain sleep cycles. There's a huge amount we as humans don't understand about sleep. It's a massive unknown for us. But what we do know is you need to go through these sleep cycles. And one of the big differentiating factors in these sleep cycles is how deeply unconscious you are. So there's deep sleep, where, as you'd expect, you're deeply unconscious. But on the other end of the scale, there's something called REM sleep. Now, REM sleep is where your brain lights up almost as if you're fully awake. It's called REM sleep because it stands for rapid eye movement. Your eyes are flickering behind the eyelids and you're dreaming. So your brain's lit up almost as if you're awake. Nobody knows what REM sleep is about. But it's crucial. People who are robbed of REM sleep become very depressed. They become very introspective. They've done tests on rats where they've robbed them of REM sleep and it's actually killed them. So we don't know what it is, but it's massively important. I think all you really need to know is you just need to be going through these natural sleep cycles, and then you wake up with one of the best feelings on the planet, which is waking up refreshed and ready to start the day. Okay, now when you drink alcohol, because it's a sedative, the first part of the night, the sedating effects are kicked in, and your brain can't take you into, for example, REM sleep. In a natural sleep cycle, the sleeper will get, I think, 6 or 7 rounds of REM sleep. When you're drinking, you typically only get 2. And then, of course, for the latter part of the night, when the sedating effects wears off and the oversensitization is kicked in, that's usually 5 hours after your last drink, which is why drinkers, most of them will wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, unable to get back to sleep. Then you don't sleep at all, or you just drift into some weird kind of, like dozing, half asleep, half awake, which isn't any proper sleep at all. And of course, that impact on sleep has a massive impact on your anxiety levels as well. So I completely agree. That's absolutely the case. It does have a massive impact on anxiety. Alcohol withdrawal is anxiety, and more alcohol will relieve it. How you would test it, I don't know, but I don't think you really do need to test it. I think people just instinctively know you're telling the truth when you explain it to them in those ways. And I think when you look into the science as well, it all gets a bit complicated, but that's exactly what the experts say as well. That's how alcohol works. I'm just wondering if maybe before members join, Would it not be better if they agreed to having read at least one of your books? I don't know if it's just me, but I get so frustrated when I read questions like, I wish I could just drink 1 or 2 glasses of wine a night, but I can't. What's wrong with me? I find this incredibly frustrating, as all the facts are written down in your book. If they read the books, they'll have the knowledge behind them, not even to want that first glass. I personally have read both books and can hand on heart say they have changed my mindset life. I was a weekend binger, and now, after the knowledge I've gained, no longer fantasize or think much about drinking, and my anxiety is gone, and I'm now off my medication. Thank you so much for what you do, William. You're amazing. Well, that's very nice. That's couldn't have drafted that better myself. But I think this is another thing as well. I'm off my medication. I've heard so many people who are on antidepressants, going back to talking about anxiety. They go to the doctor, they've got anxiety, they've got depression, they're given antidepressants, and they just carry on with the antidepressants and the drinking. And actually, it's the drinking that's causing the problem. The drinking's causing the chemical imbalance and ruining the sleep. Take that away, and that person is actually fine, which is why I get intensely irritated with this whole thing about, at the root of all addiction is pain, or you need some kind of underlying mental condition, and that's what causes alcoholism. It's absolutely nonsense. It may be true for a lot of people. It may be true for an overwhelmingly bigger percentage of people who've got mental health issues, but it is not true for everyone. For a lot of people, they drink alcohol, not because they've got an underlying issue or some kind of childhood trauma or whatever. They drink alcohol because 90% of the population drink alcohol. They drink alcohol because they're pressured to drink alcohol. They drink alcohol because if you don't want to drink alcohol, you've got to explain yourself time and again why you don't want to drink at whatever party you're at. So most people just drink it, and they drink it and they drink it and they drink it, and they get depression and anxiety and ruined sleep. They get addicted to it, and that's the problem. And they quit alcohol, and the problem's solved. And yes, people with mental health issues may gravitate towards heavy drinking purely because alcohol is the most readily available sedative out there, but it's not true for everyone. So, yeah, I think that's fantastic. But yes, and again, it is very frustrating. There are questions for the group. You have to specifically say either you've read the books or we'll go onto the website, and you have to tick yes, otherwise you're not allowed in the group. But unfortunately, people lie. So all I would say is every post that is on there like that, where people jump in and say, go and read the books, I'm intensely grateful for. But I also think a lot of people do that. A lot of people come in the group, they post and say, I wish I could, this is, and people jump in and say, go and read the books, and they go and read the books and they quit. So it is irritating, but I think stick with it because people are being helped by it. And it's a way in, I think, for people hearing about the book sometimes, because, when people have got an issue with alcohol, they scroll through and join a few Facebook groups and at random, and maybe they lie through their teeth about that they'll go on the website or whatever. But if enough people then recommend it, they look into it, and hopefully some of them are helped. Here's another question along the same line, actually. So it's obviously bugging people. I wrote this last night and then deleted it, but it's still bugging me. So we'll leave it here and up to you whether to answer it or not. I don't want to add fuel to fires unnecessarily. There's been some heated debate about the point and the function of this forum. I'd like to think of it as a supportive community based on sobriety in the Alcohol Explained books, but not necessarily limited to that as we negotiate a new way of living. Some seem to have strong ideas, however, on what should and shouldn't be posted. I wonder whether you had any views on the post, the contents and the parameters, as it's your forum after all. I'm not entirely sure what I'm being asked, but it's an Alcohol Explained Facebook group. So it's for people who have read the books or, as I say, have been asked to go onto the website to read what's on there to sort of broadly follow the principles. So there's thousands and thousands of alcohol support groups out there. And, if you hate the books, disagree vehemently with everything that's in it and can't stand the sight of me, then don't be in the group. It is an Alcohol Explained Facebook group. So it's for people who've read the book. And yes, you don't have to agree with everything. I never published the book thinking everyone's going to agree with everything. And I don't mind people having a debate about things, but it is for people who have, it's Alcohol Explained themed. And as I say, the website's free. it's all there. You don't have to even, it's not even one of these websites where you have to give me your email address so I can bombard you with marketing emails. I don't even do that. So you just go on there, you can read the first 5 chapters, numerous articles. So yeah, it is for people who've read the book or been on there and follow broadly the principles. It's about sobriety, but as I say, if you know interest in the books, and people have done this, well, I'm not going to read the books, I'm not going to go on the website. Well, don't be in the group then, because it is an Alcohol Explained group. I think this is the last question now, which is good because I'm nearly up to an hour. Good day. I hope I'm in the right place to post this question. I'm almost finished your book. I have read several others. For me, I'm finding your book most helpful. Yes. I'm on day 19 today, and yes, I still do get that witching hour craving. Just have one, but have continually been playing out the entire scenario, drink 10, and how I'll feel the next day. And it's been stopping me in my tracks. I'm finding anxiety is a little heightened as of late. So day 19, okay, yep. Lots of issues at home. I'm not unique. I know we all have them, but I'm wondering if this is because the physical effects of alcohol have now left me to my own devices, so I'm not hiding behind the alcohol. My resting heart rate has settled down a lot and I'm feeling better every day. Evenings are the worst. I'm anticipating that day 21 or thereabouts can be a time when people can suffer anxiety again, and just wondering if this too is part of the process. Sorry for the long post. So firstly, well done on day 19. A few points I would say there. You've been continually playing out the entire scenario, drink 10 and how I'll feel the next day, which is absolutely the right thing. But don't just think about the next day, because as I say, we tend to think of, when we're drinking, we're happy all evening, but we're not. You get a minor boost from the first couple of drinks, and that's no more than relieving the anxiety caused by the previous ones and all the tiredness and the lethargy and all the rest of it. And then after that, you kind of just semi-comatose, and or your emotions start to run riot and you start to have arguments and all the rest of it. So don't just fast forward it to the next day. Fast forward it to an hour's time when you're just zonked out on the sofa, not really experiencing much of anything, or having an argument, or just getting more annoyed with things generally. It's not pleasant even while you're doing it. And of course, the point is, when you're trying to quit, even the first one's poison, let's be honest, because if you're committed to not drinking, and when you drink loads and feel awful the next day, even the first one's not particularly nice, because you're thinking, oh God, I'm doing it all over again. I feel awful again tomorrow. So it changes. It's not like it was when you're 15 years old out with your mates. It's just not the same. It's totally different, and stop conning yourself that it is. So do that. I would say the anxiety on day 19, it won't be to do with that chemical imbalance. That will be long gone. It could be issues at home, and I've talked about briefly already how you do need a new coping mechanism. So think about that. Another thing to do, I think, if you're an evening drinker, when you're drinking, you tend to just sit and drink. That tends to be the focus. And yes, you might have the TV on or whatever you're doing, but really the point of the evening is just to drink. So when you remove the alcohol, suddenly you've got a load of time. And I don't know if you may or may not find this, but if you're sat there watching TV, since I stopped drinking, I hardly ever watch TV because it's just mind-numbing crap. You have to be half comatose to enjoy it. So you may find, like me, things that you used to enjoy, programs you used to enjoy, you just don't enjoy anymore because they weren't enjoyable to begin with. You need to have a big fat stupid pill to find them remotely entertaining. So plan out your evenings, do something different, pick up a book or get a new hobby, just do something different, go for a walk. The evenings are getting longer now. We're moving supposedly into summertime. Plan an evening, because the other thing is having your mind jumping around, what do I do now, is where you're going to start thinking, I could have a drink, or I would have a drink. If you've got a set plan for the evening, you know what, I'm going to stop work, I'm going to make dinner, I'm going to read a book, I'm going to get an early night, go for whatever it is, get that plan in place and stick to it. And then you will find, I talked about craving before, but stop the fantasizing and stop the letting your mind dwell on it. It's not on the menu. Alcohol is not there for you anymore. It's gone. You won't be having it. So sometimes having that sort of that plan for the evening, that timetable about what you're going to do, can be really powerful as well. But yeah, I don't think that's it. Don't forget as well, you're doing really well on day 19, but it still really is early days. You'll still be sort of changing your habits a bit. That will come in time as well. And I think you'll probably be getting there. But as I say, I think it will be much easier if you can have some kind of routine in the evening. Right, they were all the questions. I hope that was useful, everyone. Yes, so I will hopefully see everyone next week. Have a good weekend, everyone. And yeah, take care.